My name is Andrew Isaacs, the faculty director for this program, and I want to share with you two particular thoughts regarding the lesson that follows by Professor Nauta. First of all, I'd like you to pay special attention to the process that Professor Nauta talks about when he discusses markets. In particular, how engineerable the innovation process regarding addressing markets actually is. What I mean by that is that as you develop an innovative business, a startup, note how you can fine-tune the market you're addressing with that startup, iterate, refine in a loop how you are going about addressing that particular market. If a particular market niche isn't working out for your business, you can pivot, you can change, you can go to the next market opportunity. And in fact, you should plan on iterating from plan A to plan B to plan C and so on. There's a second takeaway that's embedded in this idea of iteratively discovering or uncovering markets. And that second idea is that there is no end to the iteration process. Your product is never actually finished, and your market discovery process is never actually finished. Your job, in fact, as an innovator, is to work to uncover in an endless loop, an ongoing, continuous loop, to uncover market needs, customer requirements, because they themselves will evolve with time. Successful companies are ones that embed this open-ended innovation loop regarding both the product and market discovery into their DNA. I hope you enjoy the lecture that follows.
Hi, I'm Frans Nauta, and I'm going to talk with you about markets and customers. More specific, how to analyze markets and how to engage with customers, so you can build your startup into a wild success. Now, at the end of this, I want you to be able to do all these things. Make a market segmentation, do what we call a tam sam som. This is not a famous Vietnamese dish. It has to do with market analysis. I'll explain. How to do a multi-criteria analysis that will help you to select a beachhead market. How to conduct customer interviews. You'll be surprised how important that is. How to make a minimum viable product. And how to run experiments with it. That's what I want you to be able to learn. And it's a lot. And you will be doing a lot more than just looking at this video to make all these skills something that you can actually do. Now, what is a startup? A startup is a temporary organization designed to search for a repeatable and scalable business model. That's a definition by Steve Blank. So let's break it down. A startup is not the goal to stay a startup. The goal is to build a large company. So in the beginning you are a startup, and then you become something else, or you stop. So it's a temporary organization. We say sometimes, well, there's no such thing as an 8-year-old startup. It's a 3-year-old startup connected to a 5-year-old failure. Now, the startup is designed to search. So the goal is not to execute. The goal is to search for a repeatable and scalable business model. So something that you can do more than once, and once it grows, becomes more efficient. So it can grow to something really big. So consultancy typically is not really a scalable business model, because for every new client that you have, you need to hire new people. We want something scalable. That means more clients means not necessarily that many people, so we can really build a big business. So once you've found your repeatable and scalable business model, great, you can build it into a great company. And that's where the startup phase stops. And sometimes you have to conclude that there is no repeatable and scalable business model. then you can either decide, okay, I'm going to stop. I'm not going to continue with this startup project. Or you can say, well, I'm okay with a smaller business. Those options are up to you. But this is a startup. Now, the goal of a startup, I like to phrase in this acronym. GGDIYCMN. Or TGGGM, or something like that. It's hard to pronounce. What do you think it stands for? Can you figure out what this stands for? I'll help you a little. So the T is total. The G is kind of easy because that has to do with the globe in the image. So it's total, global. D is for domination. We want total global domination in your chosen, and the M you probably got, that's about market. Total global domination in your chosen market. And then the N, because you're small, you can dominate a niche. You cannot dominate the whole world. That's later, once you've found your business model. In the beginning, this is what you can strive for. Total global domination in your chosen market niche. Now, why don't we do a little exercise? Because I often talk with founders about doing a startup, and sometimes you will run into competition with large companies. And you actually can compete as a small startup with these large companies, although most founders find that a really strange idea. But it's a fact. And I'm curious if you can come up with a few advantages that you as a startup have compared to a large corporation. And it's just right. Advantages, startup versus large corporation. And if you happen to be with a few other people, discuss with them first before you start the video. So take a minute and write down 3 advantages of a startup versus a large corporation. Right, so of course I'm very curious what yours are, but we can't discuss here. But here are 3 of my favorites. So as a startup, you can learn much faster because you can have so much easier data. You're much more flexible in strategy. What does that mean? Well, if a large company wants to change what it does, which is basically a strategy, if it wants to really completely change the company, it will take years to change that company. First, they have to hire a consultant that does some advisory work because it's all kind of hard, and they do a lot of committees, and then slowly, the oil tanker might change course slowly. Whereas in your startup, the only thing you need is 3 minutes. 3 minutes with the 3 founders in the room. You say, well, this clearly doesn't work. We have to do something else. And then you probably need a little more discussion. So let's say it will take you a few hours, and you can completely change course. You are like the small Greenpeace boat against these large oil tankers. You are much more flexible. Of course, you're smaller, so if they go over you, oh, it's not good. But you are much more flexible in your strategy. And you can be much better in execution too. You can execute with a speed that a large company has a much harder time with. So there are actually many advantages. So let's look at some common mistakes that happen often when startups are engaging with markets and customers. Here's 4. The full-scale rollout. We don't do that much anymore, but there's a good reason for that. The China syndrome, selling to all customers everywhere, or selling exclusively to one customer. And the last one is a rare case of too much focus, which I hardly see in startups. I'd say most startups are not focused enough. So let's walk them through. Let's look at Webvan. You saw already the picture coming up. So Webvan was a startup founded in 1996. And it was a grocery delivery service. And they promised that if you ordered online, within 30 minutes you would have your groceries at home. And the company raised 400 million in venture capital, and even did an IPO 3 years after founding at a valuation of $4.8 billion. Well, up until that time when they went IPO, they only had $395,000 in sales. Now, how is that possible? Oh yeah, and they had 50 million in losses. And it's considered one of the biggest failures in startup country. There is almost nothing like it. Because what they did is they built the whole product, they built the whole infrastructure, they built everything, they hired the salespeople, they put everything online, and then no customer showed up whatsoever. It was just a complete failure. They could have known this, of course, if they would have started much smaller. That's why today we use what we call the lean startup method, or customer discovery, or customer development. It's all terms for the same sort of things that we do. You may have heard of agile development, which is a project management method to do iterative design instead of doing everything with a blueprint from the start. So this is the typical example of how not to do it. You don't start with a blueprint. You start as soon as you can engaging with customers, and that is what a lot of this course is about. Another thing that I often see is what I call sort of the China syndrome. And it goes something like this. So China's big, right? I don't know if you've heard, but it's actually really, really big. It's huge. So what now if we went to China and just got a tiny, tiny, tiny piece of the market? Given how big it is, it would still be a multi-million market, and so on. You can see where this is going. This doesn't make sense at all. So you want to have focus on a specific niche, on a market segment. We'll get to that later. Don't do the China syndrome or the equivalent from that, because the US is also a very big market, and so on. Don't do this. Another problem that we often see with startups is they try to sell to everyone everywhere. They're completely all over the map, literally. So here's an example from a Dutch startup, Evening Breeze. And what they make is a hardware product. You can see it above the bed. What it is an air conditioning that will use a very little amount of energy, because it will cool only around your bed. Because what it does, it pushes the cold air up, and because cold air is heavier than warm air, it will slowly trickle down on you. And also they filter the air, so you have clean, cool air as a breeze over your bed. That's the idea, and it's a beautiful idea. It works really well. And this team was really proud because they had so many demand from different countries. So they had this map in the office, behind them a wall, and every time they had a sale in a new country, they would put a red dot on the map. And sure enough, within a few years, they had 30 dots on the map. They were a multinational, selling in 30 countries. The only problem is that they sold less than 1,000 products, and the team was less than 10 people. So can you imagine if you sell to a hotel somewhere in the Dutch Antilles, or in South Africa, or in Russia, and it breaks, and you don't have a local agent that can service it, and, well, you can imagine. This is a nightmare. You don't want to do this. You want to be focused. Don't do what Evening Breeze did. Don't sell to everyone everywhere. And then the last thing that is a risk if you engage with customers is selling to one market, or selling to one customer. And it typically happens when you're doing sort of technology development that is really expensive for a startup, and then you partner with a large company, and the large company's R&D department will help you. And then I always see these R&D people in these large corporations, they're really smart, right? They're really good in asking questions. So for every answer that you provide them, they will have at least 3 new questions, and probably even more. They're really good at that. So we have a term for this. We call this free education. You are training these people with all the things that you learned, but it's very unlikely that it will build a successful company. Another expression that is here used in English, it's being like nibbled to death by 1,000 ducks. And you don't want to do this, so don't do this. Now there's lots of books on how to do customer development, how to do market analysis. Here are some of my favorite. Steve Blank designed actually his thinking on customer development at the business school here in Berkeley. and it resulted in the book The 4 Steps of the Epiphany. And later he published the Startup Owner's Manual. So if you want to do more literature, go into this. Eric Ries was a student of Steve Blank, so a student here at Haas at the business school, and he wrote The Lean Startup. I really like Bill Olette's Disciplined Entrepreneurship. You will see later on, I use it a lot. And 2 other books that I recommend if you want to do more reading is Getting to Plan B from John Mullins and Randy Commissar. And a small book that you should definitely read is called The Mom Test by Rob Fitzpatrick. And the Mom Test will show up later also in this course. So some common mistakes and some literature. Now let's get to work. So let's get to work. Market segmentation. So you have a startup idea and you want to figure out where you should go into the market. And you don't want to do what Webvan did. You don't want to finish your product, go into the market and discover that what you thought was the market is actually not there. You want to do it smarter, right? So that's why we start open. You don't know yet. You only have hypotheses about what your potential market is. So we want to check all kinds of hypotheses and do that as quickly as possible so we can validate. And the first step is do a good market segmentation. Where to start? Well, it's really simple. You simply start brainstorming. If you have a co-founder, you do it together with your co-founder. If you don't have a co-founder, you might want to find one, but until you have one, invite a few friends over, buy them pizza and a beer or whatever, and walk them through your problem. So say, okay, so I have this idea for a startup, and now I want to get a sense of what kind of markets this could actually be a valuable product. Do you have any ideas? And you write as many sticky notes as you can. These yellow notes, just keep on writing and see if you can get to like 50 potential markets and really think it through with them. So this will take typically like a few hours, right? You're not going to be finished in like 10 minutes. So you brainstorm. Next step, we want to learn more about these markets because we don't want to stay at the level of energy market or housing market. That's too broad. We want to zoom in a little. So the next step is you simply try to get some market data. You go to Google or another search engine and you look for more information. So can you learn more about the energy market? There's upstream, there's downstream, and there's all kinds of different providers in that market. Or if you are in financial technology, bit of a hype right now, great. What are competitors there? What are the large banks looking for? What are the insurance companies looking for? A ton of stuff happening there. So just try to get an idea about these markets. Who's in that market? How is the market operating? This will take actually quite a lot of time. So you should, in general, I'd say you take at least a month for just doing this whole market research work before you start building. Also, if you want to learn more, the best way to learn, of course, is through people in your network that have access to these markets. So you can go on LinkedIn and have a good look. If people in your network are actually in the markets that you are interested in right now, and simply give them a call or send them an email, say, hey, can we have a quick Skype conversation on your financial technology company and whether you teach me a little how that market works? Because you're a startup, in general, people are really generous. They're willing to help you. So you can ask a lot of people for help. You better train yourself also in that because you do need a lot of help to make your startup successful. So let's look at an example. This is Evolution Energy, or Evolution Énergie, as they say in French, because this is a French startup. They're in Paris. The founders are Erwin and Fabien. Erwin is the salesperson, Fabien is the technology person. And as you can see, if you read down a little, they have 13 PhDs in astrophysics, mathematics, and neurosciences. Or as they say, energy is becoming rocket science. And we have the experts. So they've built a team of people, and what their business is that they can analyze energy data and billing data on your energy bill, and then based on that, they have an algorithm and some smart intelligence in their software that can help you reduce your energy consumption by 10 to 20%, depending on the kind of customer. So, well, you can imagine many, many markets where you can deliver this service, right? So the question is where to start? Well, you simply start with brainstorming. Now what we're looking for is not these overhaul markets, like I said. We want to have a market segment. And let me give you the definition of a market segment, because this is kind of important. First, we want to have customers within a market that all buy similar products. This makes your sales process repeatable, because they all buy the similar product, right? So we don't have to tweak the product. It's all kind of nice and easy, and we want a repeatable and scalable business model. We also want customers that have similar sales cycles and expect products to behave in a similar way. So we have a scalable sales process. Repeatable, scalable, And what we also want is that our customers talk with each other. So they read the same magazines, they go to the same conferences, they maybe are competitors in certain ways, but they still meet and talk about what they're doing, because that's what professionals do. They love to talk about their work. And you need that because once you have a few customers, they become your marketing agents. You as a startup, you don't really have budget to do marketing, right? So it would be really, really great if your customers become your marketeers. So once you have a customer, they can serve as compelling and high-value references for each other in the market. Nice, huh? That's what you want. So you want a market segment. Now let's look at Evolution Energy. So this is not their chart, it is my chart based on the knowledge I have of their business. So it's a nice software business that goes into, well, it can go anywhere really. You can imagine them going to consumer market, well, to rental or homeowners. Okay, the sales cycle will be maybe hard because you have to do a lot of sales to get some sort of revenue, but it's an option. You can imagine cities. Cities own a lot of buildings. So the office buildings or community centers or libraries within cities. Maybe you can do a deal per city. That would make your sales cycle cheap. You can imagine military. And military both when they go abroad for deployment or their home bases here in the country where you live, and well, we can go to the other side and think non-profits, and within non-profits it could be education, and within education it could be universities or primary education or colleges, and so on and so on. You get the picture. You want to detail as far down as possible so you can actually get to what we call a market segment. This is the work. It's easy, but it's also a lot of work. Think that you probably spend a month on this at least. So we've made a beginning, at least I hope you did, with analyzing potential markets where you can add value. Now the next step is to dive a little deeper, and that's what we do with the Tam Sam Som. Again, it's not a dish, although it sounds delicious. It's just total addressable market, serviceable addressable market, and serviceable obtainable market. And it's easy, right? So the total addressable market is where you can sell. The serviceable part is where you can play. So let's say you're a European startup based in Germany. So you can typically in the next 3 years of your startup life serve markets in Western Europe. That's realistically. And then maybe if you can find funding, you could also maybe address the US. So one other big market, but probably not more than that. So the whole world is not going to be your playing field in the first 3 or 5 years of your startup. So your total addressable market, great. That's how big it in the end can become once you have found your repeatable and scalable business model and everything is working and you have time and you can set up international sales offices and all that. But your serviceable addressable market is going to be smaller than that. That's where you're going to be limited to in the next few years. And then within that, of course, there's competition. So you will need to be realistic about what your market share can be. So what is obtainable for you in the sum is your sum. So let's say we want to have 20% market share somewhere. That's 20% of your sum. So the TAM is the biggest, then the sum, then the sum. Easy, right? So let's look at an example. This is Eternal Sun. Eternal Sun is a startup spin-out out of Delft University of Technology, and they make these machines that you see on the screen here, solar simulators. These guys are really great in simulating sunlight with really high accuracy, over 99 point, I believe 5%, at least over 99%. So anybody who has to do with sunlight in their industry and needs to do testing can use their equipment. Now, that's a lot of markets. These are the guys who started it in 2011, Shokri and Stefan. And they started as students. In 2014, they got their first investment, 2 million. And in 2016, they acquired a company, an American competitor, with about a quarter of market share in solar panel testing, which is like about as good as the story gets. So let's look at one of their potential market when they just started. And these numbers are just hypothetical. So I'm just doing this to give you a sense of how to play with the numbers. So let's assume solar testing is one of their markets for PV panels, solar panel testing. So their total addressable market, if you do some research online and you look at company data from publicly owned companies, you get to a market size total addressable market of about 2 billion. Now, Shokri and Stefan think that they can address about half of that because there's a big concentration in the industry in Western Europe, China, and Korea. So they think that within these markets, they can actually do about 50% of the total addressable market. So their sum is half of the TAM, 1 billion. And then they figure that in the first 5 years of their company, they can obtain about a quarter of that market. So their sum is a quarter of the sum. Makes sense, right? So we go from 2 billion total market size, half of that is servable, and a quarter of that is obtainable. And that's how we look at the numbers. Now, the problem here, of course, is we're at a too high aggregate level. These are not market segments. So just to remind you, what are market segments again? We want to have a group of customers that all buy similar products and that have similar sales cycle and expect these products to provide value in a similar way. And we want them to talk with each other. We want word of mouth. So we need to go deeper and more detailed. So again, if we focus on solar panel testing, we have the panel producers that test themselves. We have the commercial test providers that are hired by panel producers if they don't want to have their own testing facilities. We have the public R&D institutes that typically do R&D with the panel producers and are hired by them, and sometimes do also some government testing, whether things are according to specs. And then there's the university research equipment. And just look at the numbers. Again, this is hypothetical, but it gives you a sense. So the panel producers are the biggest chunk of the pie, about 1 billion. Then come the commercial ones, 650. The public R&D test providers, about 300, and universities the smallest, with 50 million a year. It's total addressable market. Now, we're going to take the serviceable addressable market. The sum is half of all that, so that is easy. We just divide it by 2. And then it becomes more interesting because the obtainable market share will be different for different markets because it will be different for you how easy it is to access. So for the panel producers, well, getting in these large companies 5% of market share in a tough market with a lot of competition is probably pretty good. On the commercial side, these commercial test providers, they might get up to 10% because they're more looking for innovative test solutions, and what they have is pretty innovative. Public R&D test providers, we assume something like 15%, close to that. And then for the university research equipment, because they are a university spin-out and because universities really want to do this research that brings the efficiency of the solar panels further and that would want to do really innovative stuff, they might get to 20% market share. So that gives us our sum for all these different market segments. And it's crucial that you do it at this level. There are so many other markets where Eternal Sun could have gone into when they were doing their initial stage development. So the chemical industry, the automotive industry, painting, greenhouses, aerospace, aviation, you name it. These guys could go literally anywhere. And I'm sure for your startup, it's probably about the same. If you have a nice idea, if you have a good idea, so many potential markets where you go into. So the next step is then how to decide which one to go for, because you can't do them all. That's what we do next. We have so many options to choose from, so many potential markets. Now, you've started doing your sum, you're doing your first analysis, but in order to be able to decide which markets we should go in first, you need to do even more analysis. And a good tool to do that is the multi-criteria analysis. Sounds really complicated, but it's actually really simple. It is on the top, you see a row where, for instance, for the example that I used from Eternal Sun, we have industry, commercial R&D, public R&D, and university labs. So those are the market segments that we identified. And of course, there will be many more. And on the column side, you see different criteria. And we took them from Bill Olet's book, Disciplined Entrepreneurship, because I like these. So is there a single identifiable buyer? Number one. How well are they funded? Is it an accessible market? So do you know people there? What is the buying reason for them? Is it a need or is it nice to have? Can you sell a whole product which creates more value, or can you just do a segment? How tough is the competition? If the competition is really tough, you score low. If the competition is not that intense, you score high. Next segment. So can you come from this niche into something even bigger that is interesting for you? And then does it fit with your founder's dream? All kinds of criteria. And you simply score them from 1 to 5 or 1 to 3. And just start doing these numbers. And you're sort of beginning to get the idea, right? This is going to be a lot of work. You are going to be working with a lot of spreadsheet, with a lot of rows and columns, trying to sort of figure out what is smart to get into. And it's not only limited to these criteria, because, well, there are other criteria to consider, like size of the market, number of customers, access to the decision-making unit. So this is an interesting one. And decision-making unit sounds kind of abstract, but, well, in the home it's easy. It's the grown-ups in the house that can decide to buy something. If you're, for instance, in energy. Or if you want to sell apps, well, it's simply everybody with an App Store or a Google Play or a Microsoft Shop account. Also not that hard. But what if you want to sell to large companies or to government? Well, typically you need to convince more than one person in that organization to do the sell. Because, well, let's say you're selling to someone in R&D. That person needs to convince other people, if it's an expensive buy, to join him and agree. Because only then you can do the sale. So it can be someone from the procurement office. It typically is someone from the business side who maybe has to co-fund it a little. It's surely someone from the financial department. And if it's a big enough number, then you also need someone from the board or his superior to agree to buying it. So your access to all of that really helps. So for instance, in the sales process, if you have a history in a certain industry and you understand the industry, you have a good network, that could be a strong argument to go into that market. Another one is innovation speed in the market. I'll get to that a little later. Another thing to look at, do you love the market? Because if you don't, like a friend of mine who started a video game company and then turned out he didn't like to email with 14 to 18-year-olds because those are typically the kids that spend a lot of time playing video games, you kind of have a problem. Minimum viable product potential, we get to that later, but that's also an interesting one to look at. And then, is there a clear customer pain? Can you find someone with a real headache? Because that can be a strong motivation to build a good relationship with your company and buy your product. Now, not everyone is your customer. This is probably a scheme that you know. This is the innovation curve. It was designed by Rogers, and it's a really simple schedule to look at different innovation dynamics in the market. So on the left, we have innovators, and that's about 2% of the population. And then we have the early adopters, which is about 14% of the population. Then comes the early majority, 34%. 34% is late majority. And then come the laggards, the people who don't want to change at all, who drag their feet. Now, as a startup, you want to look for the people, even inside your segments, who are the innovators and the early adopters, because they are eager to try new stuff. These are the people who will literally pull your product out of your hands because they're eager to try new stuff. If you can't convince the early adopters and the innovators that your product is worthwhile, it's going to be really hard to convince the rest of the market. You see the gap here in between. It's the chasm, as Moore calls it, the chasm between the early adopters and the early majority. Now, the early adopters need to be your people, your advocates. They will do the marketing for you. So if you have a good product, they will start talking to the early majority. They start bragging about how great a product that they have. And then other people in that early majority will think, maybe I should get it too. But it's at least start on the left side of the curve, because it's much harder to sell at the other end. Okay? So what we want to get to in the end is the beachhead market. This is where we start conquering the world. This is the place where you can do the total global domination in your chosen market niche thing. That's here. That's where you start. So your first entry into the market is the beachhead. It should be small enough so you can be a really significant player. People should start noticing you. And it should be big enough to generate some cash, so you can start building your business model and see if it works out. So do your multi-criteria analysis to select up into about 3 potential beachhead markets. And then we want to go dive a little deeper and start talking to these customers. And that's what we do in the next module. We're at the point now where you've done market segmentation, you've done a multi-criteria analysis, and you probably now have between 3 and 6 potential beachhead markets, markets where you can start. So the first entry into the market. And it should be small enough for you to become a significant player, where you can be total globally dominant in your chosen market niche, right? And that niche should be big enough to generate some cash for you. That's what we're looking for. Now, this is all hypothesis stuff. We have ideas, hypotheses about that there is a market. The only way to know is to check for facts, is to validate it in the market. And we do that through customer interviews. But beware, people are lying. Yeah, people are lying all the time. And actually, mostly people are lying because they want to be nice to you. They don't want to hurt your feelings. Especially for startups, people really, in general, want startups to be successful. We all root for you because doing a startup is a courageous thing. So people tell us what we want to hear if you ask the questions that make that possible. So the art that you have to get into your fingers, as we say in Dutch, the art that you have to make something that you are capable of, is to be a good interviewer and start asking the right questions. And for that, I suggest you read, for instance, this simple book. It's called The Mom Test. It's written by Rob Fitzpatrick. It's a few hours read and then a lot of effort to develop your skill as an interviewer. And just one of the ways to become a really good interviewer for customers is to do it a lot. So generally we say, do at least 100 customer interviews. So you become really good at it and you learn to understand the market much better. There's a few principles in the MOM test. Talk about them instead of you. Ask about specifics in the past. Listen and don't sell. Not yet. We're going to sell later. But in the interview stages, our startups mostly get into the door by asking a question to someone that could be their future customer, in the sense of that they are an expert and they are working on this product and they are an expert and could they help? And that can be by phone or via LinkedIn or via email. If you say to someone, well, I have this problem I'm trying to solve and you are really an expert, would you have 15 minutes of your time? Most people will say yes. They just want to be nice. And it's flattering if you call them a true expert, right? So let's assume you get into the door and you can do your interview. Well, let's start with your mom, how that could go, which gave the title to that book. So Mom, I have an idea for a business. Can I run it by you? And your mother, of course, will say, yes, darling. You like your iPad, right? Sure, it's great. Okay, so would you ever buy an app which was like a cookbook for your iPad? Says your mother. And it's only $40 and it's cheaper than those hardcovers on your shelf. I love cookbooks, sounds nice. Does it come with vegan recipes or something special for Christmas? Now, let's look a little level deeper. What's happening here in the conversation? Mom, I have this idea. She says, sure, I'm proud of you and I don't want to hurt your feelings. You like your iPad? Well, your mom is actually thinking, well, I don't use it that much, only for email and when I surf on the couch. Would you ever buy an app which was like a cookbook? I don't really need another cookbook, your mother's thinking. $40, and your mother's thinking, well, I have plenty of cookbooks, and isn't that a little expensive? And, So you're getting false information. Based on what your mother is saying, she might be a customer. Whereas if you would have asked other questions, you probably would have learned that she's not that interested. She's not going to be a customer at all. So let's do a little quiz. Good or bad question? If you are having an interview with a customer and you ask them this question, do you think it's a good idea? Good or bad question? Pretty bad, right? Because you invite them to say something nice to you. Never do that. Would you buy a product which solved this problem? Good or bad question? Sorry, bad question, because future intention. Again, people want to be nice to you. They say, yeah, sure, why not? How do you currently deal with this problem? Good or bad question? Very good question, because this is something about now. How do you solve it now? It gives you a lot of information whether your product actually can solve their problem. Talk me through the last time you had this problem. Good or bad question? Very good. Gives you really detailed information if they're willing to do this with you. How much would you pay for this? Good or bad question? Again, it's not a good question because people don't really know until you let them pay. Intentions are always hard to validate. People overestimate what they will pay. They want to be nice to you. How much money does this problem currently cost you? This is a really interesting question. If you can get this answer, you get pricing information because you know what it costs them now. And if you have a better solution, you might even be able to charge more than this. But at least you could start here. Very nice question. Is there budget for this? Good question, bad question? Yeah, sure, it's good. If they're willing to give it to you, you get a sense, okay, they're willing to buy. Who else should I talk to? Good or bad question? Good question. Because if you know someone you like, they know probably other people in the industry. And it also is a sense that they will only introduce you to others if they like you, what you are doing. So this is a good one. So this was sort of a first one. We're going to do a second one in a bit. We've done our first round of customer interviewing. And I'm curious if you've seen a pattern, or if you see sort of a pattern arising from the questions that scored really well and the ones that scored bad. What did you notice? Here's a few rules. Ask about past behavior. Try to get facts, not intentions in the future. You want to know what keeps them awake at night, if there's a real pain. And it's really helpful if you know the frequency of that. So the more frequent, of course, the bigger the chance that they need your help. You want to try to get as many details as you can. So can you walk me through this? How are you solving it right now? When was the last time that you do this? And you really want to know what their current solution is. So how are you solving this right now? Because the current solution, if there's, is crucial. If there is not a current solution, you know there's not a real problem, right? So no current solution means this is not a customer. This is someone just complaining about a problem that they have, but it's not even a big enough problem to work on a solution. Not interesting. But if they are working on a solution or have a solution, you can learn two things. Your solution should be better than what they have right now. So knowing what their solution is, you can figure out whether you're actually already good enough. Then the second thing you want to find out about their current solution is how expensive it is, because it gives you information about the price that you can charge them for your, hopefully, much better solution. You can even maybe charge more than their current solution cost because you have a better product. So this is what you want to ask about. See if you can find strong emotions, like frustration or excitement, and things they really care about. So people shouldn't be sort of sitting with their arms crossed. No, they should be engaged in the conversation. Those are the meetings that tell you, oh, this is something, here's something really going on. I might actually have a customer here. Now, let's say we walk out of a meeting and we conclude with some of the statements that follow. Is that progress or not? Are we actually having maybe a product market fit here between our idea and a potential beachhead market or not? Yes, no. Sounds great, I love it. That's what at the end your potential client says to you. Sounds great, I love it. Is that good or bad? Is that a good result or no progress? No progress. It doesn't mean anything. I love it. This is just being nice to you. Brilliant. Let me know when it launches. Does that sound good? No, it doesn't mean anything. Again, let me know when it launches actually is sort of a compliment and then a stalling tactic because, well, you probably didn't launch yet. So the next months until you're launching, you cannot interact with them. It means they don't care. They really don't care. I know it sounds different, I know. But this is what we typically call a false positive. So you think it's positive, but it doesn't mean anything. And that's what we not want. We want true positives. There are a couple of people I can introduce you to when you are ready. Is that progress or not? Well, it could be. It could be. It's a partial compliment, right? So yes, I can introduce you to people in my network, which means my reputation is at stake. But is there a valid reason? Why not now? What are we waiting for? So if someone says this to you, you can say, well, it would be great if you could connect now because for me, I'm ready for having the meeting. The product is not ready, but it would be really helpful for me. I would definitely buy that. Is that progress? Sorry, no, it's not. Again, future intentions doesn't mean anything. People are really bad at predicting their behavior, even if they're sincerely saying, yes, I would definitely buy that. Again, this is a dangerous one. It's a false positive. I honestly can say from personal experience, I keep being a sucker for this one. If someone says that to me, I typically walk out of a meeting thinking, oh yes, that was a nice sell. And then, of course, I always learn, no, it is not. It is not. It's much more complicated than that. So, no, I would definitely buy that as not a good one. So here are some interview tips. I don't know if you've seen Sherlock Holmes, but that is a good starting point. If you hit some sort of signal, you keep asking around. So just circle a certain area. Ask another question, ask follow-up questions. See if they can show you, for instance, the product that they've built to solve the problem. Or if they're willing to share some specifications of that. And just keep asking. Also drill down, so keep asking why questions. See if you can get to the root of it. So yes, I understand that you tried to solve it with this, but then it didn't work. Why didn't it work? And what did you do? And why didn't you continue? And I know this can be annoying for the person you're talking to, so you should do this gently. But again, you're a startup and you're just trying to figure stuff out. So try to be as inquisitive as you can. Listen, don't talk, listen. This is a really hard one for startups. I don't know if you can see the media or the TV show Silicon Valley. It's still always about this brilliant pitch. Someone's doing a brilliant pitch and then they suddenly sell. No, this is not how it works. It's much more complicated. So please listen, don't talk. Encourage, but don't influence. So don't push them in towards your solution. I see startups do that all the time. I know it's hard, but don't. And parrot back. So confirm what they said. And if you become really good at this, you can even say on purpose something wrong in how you talk back to them. And then you can see if you really got it when they correct you. So these are all great tips on how to do customer interviews. And I suggest you become really, really good at this. It's a crucial skill. Listening is actually more important than talking when you're an entrepreneur. Interesting, huh? Time now to look at the minimum viable product. So we started with our market segmentation. You did the TAM-SAM-SOM. You looked at potential beachhead markets. You did a multi-criteria analysis. And you did plenty of customer interviews. So you've learned a lot. You've already de-risked a lot of whether your idea actually can be successful. How different from Dropbox, right? Who just spent 4 years and 800 million in building something that nobody really wanted. If they would have done what you have been doing or what you are learning to do here, none of this would have happened, really nothing. So the next step is to talk about the minimum viable product, which, for example, is a way that Dropbox got started. Before Dropbox was built, technology-wise, as a sharing platform and as a syncing platform, the founders of Dropbox simply put a movie online that explained the idea behind Dropbox. And essentially, that idea is, wouldn't it be great if all your stuff in all these different devices that you have would be in sync all the time, seamlessly? Wouldn't that be great? Well, as it turned out, many people said yes, because they sent an email, because you were invited at the end of the video to send an email. They sent their email, and the founders of Dropbox knew they had something to go for. That was their minimum viable product. So the minimum viable product doesn't even have to be a working product. It can just be a demo. So what is a minimum viable product? It's that version of a new product which allows a team to collect the maximum amount of validated learning about customers with the least effort. With the least effort. So, now what you're looking for is commitment, of course. And that commitment can be in 3 shapes. It can be people saying, well, I'm willing to spend time. I'm willing to be a beta tester. I'm willing to have time with you discussing how this can help me. The second thing can be reputation. And that means I'm willing to go up the chain in my company to see if I can find budget for your company, or to get my boss around the table at the table, so you can talk to my boss and convince him. And then the third one is, of course, the strongest signal: money, paying customers. So for your MVP, my suggestion is that you start selling as soon as you can. So although a movie is nice as a demo, the best way to validate whether there is a market is to ask for money. Use your MVP for that, if you can. And just to be sure, compliments are not commitments, right? I hope you got that by now, just to be sure. Another nice example of an MVP. This is Eternal Sun. We already discussed them. They do the solar panel testing with their solar simulator. How this company got started is they were actually their own customer. They were doing a study project. They were still students at Delft University of Technology, and they needed testing equipment because they were working on a solar cell, and that solar cell turned out to be very different from other solar cells. So the existing testing equipment in the market wouldn't work with their cell, and they needed to validate that cell, whether it was working or not, to get their grade from their professor so they could finish their studies. So in the end, they had to build their own solar simulator, and they hacked on it. They got a lamp from Italy, and they built some software, and well, just really an alpha product. And then the beautiful thing happened. They were in a lab with a group from a public research institute, and they sort of started talking, and the guys from that research institute said, well, what is it exactly that you're building? And they explained, and they said, well, that's what we also need. Can you build one for us? So they looked at each other like, yeah, sure. So then the public research people said, well, how much would that be? And they gave a very, very high price, they thought. And the guys from the research lab said, sure, when is it ready? And that's how the company got started. So this is a really extreme example of an MVP and hardly doing any customer interviews. You just run into your first customer, which is, again, the strongest signal. There's clearly a strong customer pain if it's that easy to do your first sell. This company I find particularly impressive. It's called Double Dutch, and they are a Silicon Valley startup that started with 3 MVPs at the same time. So they had 3 different ideas. They were all business to business because that's the market where they wanted to be. And one option that they worked on was a sort of Foursquare for corporates. The second one was a bit like Jabber and Slack, as a chat app for corporations. And then the third one was a platform for organizing events at large scale, business to business, so over 1,000 people attending. And they simply kept these 3 projects as really small software pieces in the air to see who would be using them the most and which one got the most traction. And in the end, it turned out to be the platform for event organizers. And while this company has been extremely successful, they are over $1 billion in terms of valuation right now, and the market they're going after is also incredibly big. So see if you can think about that. Maybe not 1 MVP, maybe 2 or 3. Of course, you need the resources for it, but it's a really interesting idea. So my suggestion is that you do an exercise. You brainstorm with your co-founder, your team, friends, and come up with at least 5 different options for your MVP, because you have so much data now from your interviews with your potential customers and your potential beachhead markets. I'm sure there will be a bandwidth. There's probably not one thing that really jumps out. And then finally ask the question, what would be the smallest feature set product that you can sell the soonest to which market? And that would probably be a really good market to go in first as your beachhead market. So here we are. This is the last part of this series of videos on how to do market research and customer engagement. And this part is about running experiments. Now, by now, it's probably really clear that your business is full of assumptions about the value proposition for your customers, the way you make money, the problem you solve, your competitive advantage, your beachhead market, and the list goes on. And the thing is, the more explicit we are about the assumptions, the bigger our chances of success, of building a successful startup. So my suggestion to you is that you sit with your co-founder, with your team, with friends, and brainstorm and try to, in like 30 minutes, get to as many assumptions that you can come up with about your business. And then the next thing is we're going to filter that list of assumptions, all those sticky notes, and see where they fit in this framework: analogs, antilogs, and remaining. So analogs are things that have proven to work in other startups or in innovation programs. And antilogs are the opposite, things that have proven not to work. And then what remains is what we want to test. Now, this thinking is from a book I mentioned earlier, Getting to Plan B, from John Mullins and René Commissar. So what is an analog? Well, let's say we are working on an app. You're working on an app and you want to figure out whether you want to charge people when they download the app, or you're going to give it away for free and then see if you can convince them to do in-app purchasing. Now, if you start doing research into that, you will see that in most app categories, the free apps, especially the ones that come new to market with no large brand behind them, are typically the ones that do best. And they convert interest from customers into money through in-app purchases. So this one can probably, you can take it from your list and say, well, I've got a strong analog here. Now, what would be an interesting anti-log? Let's say you're working in a startup and you try to do two innovations at the same time. On one hand, you're working on a technology innovation, but you're also working on a business model innovation. You're bringing a new business model into a market segment that hasn't seen that business model before. Now, you don't have to look that far to see that this is probably a pretty bad idea. Take, for instance, Better Place. This was a startup that tried to do 3 innovations at the same time. The first one was to bring electric vehicles to market, while customers were not really prepared for that yet. The second was to not charge them, but swap the batteries. So what you're looking here at is a station where you can swap batteries in like 2 minutes. And then the third innovation was a business model innovation. They didn't want to sell cars, they wanted to sell the use of cars. Like with your mobile phone, you buy subscription. So you would buy a mileage or a kilometer plan. And this has been, like Webvan, a really expensive, horrible failure. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent on these. And the company never made really any revenue. There was hardly any customer traction. So if you can find analogs and antilogs that help you to filter, then the next step is the assumptions that are left, put them on these 2 axes. So on the one hand, we have uncertain and certain, and we have high impact and low impact on your business. And you want to focus your testing, your experiments that you run, on the riskiest assumptions. So the ones with the highest impact and the highest uncertainty. That's where you're going to spend your energy. You want to validate and see if you can manage the risk that you see there. What you also want to do is start making records. So an experiment sheet like this, or anyone else, or another one you can find online. If you Google, you will see plenty of these. So you start building a track record, and you can look back in history and say, oh, okay, if I compare that experiment to that one, it helps me understand some issues in the market better. So please do this. Do a track record of how you run your experiments. So that's how you run experiments. It's not that complicated, it's just a lot of work. Now, when we started, I promised you that you will learn 7 things. How to do market segmentation, how to do a sum, multi-criteria analysis, select up to 3 beachhead markets, then conduct customer interviews, see which beachhead market probably is best for you, then work on your minimum viable product and see if you can sell that into the market, and finally run experiments. Now these 7 things is really a lot of material to go through. It will take most startups at least 2 months to go through all these steps. That would be really fast. And I typically train people for at least a day with this. So in order to really learn all this material, it's up to you. You have to go out there and do all these steps and engage with customers and run your experiments. And then you will have learned this. And of course, what I hope, and all the staff at Berkeley, is that it's going to be a tremendous success. That you will be successful in finding that beautiful niche where you will become the dominant player on Earth. And we hope that you will find a repeatable and scalable business model and put your dent in the universe, as Steve Jobs put it.
Welcome back. My name's Andrew Isaacs. I'm the faculty director for this course. And I want to share with you a couple of thoughts and points, things you might look for in the examples that follow in Professor Darwin's lecture that's about to start. First of all, notice the difference between open innovation, as Professor Darwin explains it, and other forms of innovation that are perhaps more conventional or traditional in nature. Fundamentally, the point that you'll see made, maybe the most central point to the concept of open innovation, is that not all of the smart people work for you or work in your organization, but in fact, maybe only 1% or maybe even less than 1% of the people who can influence the direction of your organization are actually already part of your organization. What that leads us to is the conclusion that we need to create an ecosystem around ourselves, around our organization, to attract and engage and interact with and collaborate with all of the creative, innovative people who might be able to help our organization in very unconventional ways. Now, I'd also like you to pay attention to the very critical point that open innovation is widely applicable. It's not just for the electronics industry. It's not just for transportation or energy. It's a set of principles that are generally applicable throughout a range of industries, really all industries. So take note of that as Professor Darwin gives a series of examples of how open innovation works effectively in a range of industries. Finally, I'd like to point out and ask you to take note of the fact that the ecosystem you create that's a true open innovation ecosystem could be extremely large, not just with a few partners, but potentially hundreds or maybe even thousands of partners or members to your innovation ecosystem. I hope you enjoy the course that follows.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Solomon Darwin. I'm the Executive Director at the Garwood Center for Corporate Innovation at the Haas School of Business. Welcome to this session on open innovation. This module has 3 sections. The first section deals with defining what is closed innovation, what is open innovation, so we know the difference. We define it differently here at Berkeley Open Innovation. We have the privilege of having Henry Chesborough, who is the father of open innovation. And open innovation is defined differently around the world, but we define it differently here at Berkeley. Segment 2 talks about the changing landscape, why open innovation is very relevant today in creating value. And segment 3 deals with the practices, the use cases, the best practices, and we'll be looking at some open business models. So Module 1 defines closed versus open innovation. I want to tell you a story to define what closed innovation is. It has to do with a company called Xerox Corporation that grew exponentially since the 50s, and into the 70s it became a Fortune 500 colossus. They made copiers, and they needed better copiers, higher quality, faster, better fonts. And that was the focus of Xerox Corporation at that time. And they established a center right here in Silicon Valley called PARC, Palo Alto Research Center. And the greatness about the center is during their research developed a lot of great inventions that are so critical to our technology that we use today. So as a result, Xerox was not able to realize the importance of what we call false negatives, which I'm going to define in a moment. And so people, the scientists who worked on these great inventions at this place, they came up with this, were frustrated, and so they left Xerox and established other companies. So closed innovation works like this. You see a picture there of a funnel. This funnel is on the side, and there's only one way in, one way out for ideas to come in and go through. And you can see the funnel is wide in the beginning. That section is called R, which means research. The research creates many, many ideas and inventions that are needed. And that's what the scientists were doing at PARC. But over time, only some of those ideas that are relevant to the market, to the Xerox machine, to making it faster and better font are selected and to establish the market. So the way it works is you have science and technology at the research center. The ideas that come through the funnel. There's one way in and one way out. And the development people develop only those ideas that are critical for their products, new products. And this is closed innovation. You have R and you have D. This is a picture that I'm showing you from the archives of Xerox Corporation, where Henry Chesborough did his research there. And he was able to secure a copy of this that illustrates the stage gate process of how ideas are generated inside the funnel, inside the lab, and how they're selected to add value to the products. But however, the process did not recognize two things. The first one, I call it false positives. So the entire process of Xerox innovation process was to minimize what we call false positives. What is a false positive? It is an idea that was birthed in the lab, inside the funnel, and it goes out, it's developed into a wonderful product, and it goes out and it fails. So it gives you the sign that it has potential, but it is a false positive, and that's a false positive error. So the process at Xerox was meant to minimize these false positives. And the second thing is to ignore what we call false negatives. These are ideas that have no relevance to the product, their own product. However, those are great ideas. These are ideas that have great potential outside the funnel, but not for the Xerox itself. So as a result of this, many ideas that were birthed inside the funnel at Xerox are relevant to you and I today. They're available on the iPad, iPhones, the internet, and you can see the list. The graphical interface, for example, was birthed inside the funnel. The bitmap screen, Ethernet, font rendering programs, as well as web searching technologies, indexing technology, and online conference technologies. All of these that are critical to us today in the technology that we use were both there, but however, they did not take root because they have been irrelevant to Xerox's own products. So the people who worked on these, the scientists who worked on these ideas, once the funding was over, and when they were told to stop their research, they just got frustrated. And so they left Xerox to establish their own companies. And you can see some of the companies there are like Apple, Adobe, and Microsoft. There are about 30 companies that were formed outside of the funnel. And some, not all, but some of those 30s, if you take the market cap of the value of those 30 companies, the combined value was much higher than Xerox itself. What is the lesson for us in this particular case? The lesson is Xerox created the value, but did not capture the value. Someone else did. Let's do a quick recap. What closed innovation is all about is it's all about controlling the marketing, the inventing, the production, the distribution, the servicing, and the financing, the whole thing. And when the problem with closed innovation is you're not good in all those things. And when Xerox tried to do this and said, well, I created so much value, let's put this idea on the shelf, and one day I will make a killing. The problem with that is that day may never come, and the value that was created today may not be of any value tomorrow. And so as a result, many ideas that were sitting on the shelf don't get materialized, and someone else has access to those or creates it on their own. Even today, 90% of the IP that is created in the R&D labs sits on shelves and collects dust. What is open innovation? Open innovation is defined by Henry Chesbrough this way. But first, let me say this. When people say, I am an open innovation person, what they mean is that I'm open to all kinds of ideas. Give me all your ideas, and I will benefit from those ideas, and I'll incorporate them into my models. That is not open innovation. There's a clear distinction between that concept of being open to all ideas and what we define it here. It is not only the purposeful inflows of knowledge, but also outflows. What Henry Chesbrough is saying in open innovation is, and open innovation is something, the value that you create need to be shared or incorporated into other people's business models so they create value for themselves as well as you, because you get some licensing income, or you create what we call an ecosystem of more friends. So open innovation is knowledge coming in, because not all the smart people work for you, and you need outside knowledge. But you also need to take your ideas, the value you create, to become valuable to other people and incorporate them into other people's business models. So in order to illustrate this, I have the same funnel that you have seen before. It's on the side. It's broader at the start, and it narrows down. It's like a gun. But it has 3 targets, not just one. It has the market that the company is in, or your company is in. But we also established 2 more. One is a new market that you can potentially get into. And the third target is other people's markets and other firms' markets, where you can share this value, or you can license the value you create with them. So in order to do this, you need a new process. The old process of closed innovation, of one way in, one way out, doesn't work. You need to first drill holes into this funnel. It means there are many ways in and many ways out. Knowledge is flowing in every direction. It comes and it goes, it pollinates, it empowers, and it just stimulates growth. So the way this works is I'm going to give you, several examples. One is, say that these are the ideas that are birthed inside the funnel, and they go out, and it's relevant to our product, and the product is developed and launched, and it's a success. The second scenario would be an idea that is birthed inside the funnel, like Xerox had cooked up a lot of these ideas, but it's not relevant to your product, but it's relevant to someone else's business. So you license it, so the knowledge flows out rather than to sit on the shelf and collect dust. Here's another idea that is birthed, and we realize, we can create a new market. We have the talent, we have the people's talent, we have the resources, we have the partnerships to create a new market. So it's not collecting dust. The other one is, this is not even our idea. It's not even birthed inside the funnel. It is someone else's idea, and so we borrow that idea because maybe due to several reasons. Maybe that company does not have the resources that you do. So you borrow those ideas, bring it into the funnel, you work on it, and you launch a new market, or even get it into your current market. That is the potential where outside knowledge comes in, and it just is not wasted. And your strengths and the other company's strengths are put to use. Here's another one. The last one here is called a boomerang. It is an idea that is birthed inside the funnel, but you get stuck. You only have, say, 15 or 20 scientists, but the world out there has millions of people who can add ideas and value. So you put it out. So the global brain goes to work, and people come in and take these ideas and develop them further, and at some point, when it's viable, you bring it back in and you launch a new market. So the idea of open innovation is that when knowledge is created, it should flow. It should not sit and collect dust. It should flow, that value is created. I would like to tell you two stories. One is the story about the transistor, and the other is about the iPod. One has to do with closed innovation, the other with open innovation, and you can contrast the two. Here are three men who won the Nobel Prize for discovering the transistor at AT&T Labs. The problem is, because of closed innovation mentality, the first transistor was not shipped out for another 10 years. It would have been shipped out much later, because the idea of the transistor, the IP, was held very closely. And it was not AT&T that shipped out the first transistor. It was a very small, unknown company at the time that came out of the ashes of World War II, a company called Sony. 10 years later, it shipped out the first transistor for $39. So between the time of its invention and commercialization, the society was robbed of this wonderful technology that could have had. Let me contrast that to the story of iPod. When I ask my students at Berkeley as to who invented the iPod, they all say it is Steve Jobs. And actually, Steve Jobs had nothing to do with it. There's a fellow by the name of Tony Fadell, who was working at Philips. And he stumbled on this technology, and he went and shared this with his management. And they all said, to go away and go back to his desk and be on the business, and it has not much relevance. So Steve Fadell came out of the company, and he cried on several people's shoulders, and one of them is Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs said, I don't know anything about this technology. I have no clue, just like you, but let's talk to some of our friends. And so what happened was they were able to talk to other ecosystems, other people that had complementary technologies to take this technology forward. They worked with Texas Instruments, Portal Player, and Toshiba, and many other companies, not listed here yet. But it took only 9 months from the time of the idea generation from the time it was marketed. So there's a big difference between 10 years and 9 months. Speed to market is an important thing in today's market. You want to take the ideas as they're generated to the marketplace much quickly, and open innovation is a process by which you can do a much better job than closed innovation. At Berkeley, we teach that IP is important, but IP is knowledge, but knowledge has to flow. You cannot hang on to it and put it into a fortress. We put knowledge into 3 buckets. There's the 90% bucket. We believe that 90% of the IP that's created, that sits on the corporate in corporations and collecting dust, need to be either given away or shared or licensed, or maybe even do spin-outs and spin-offs and not just sit idle. So I think that's how the 90% of the IP should be handled. It's there to be given away and to be shared, and not to be safeguarded with attorneys. The other 5% bucket, we believe that this is IP that has much value to your supply chain, and you go ahead and share more closely with those people, the ecosystem that's working very closely with you to help you with your business. And the last 5% pertains to the core business, and that's where you exist. And this core, you want to protect it with all your guns, with all your attorneys, because that's what creates value for you. So in today's world, because of closed innovation mentality, the attorneys protect the 100% of the IP, and they don't need to. And I think actually you lose the game when you do. You need to share the 90% of the IP that you create, or the knowledge, with others, and to create ecosystems and communities that will help you to enable your business and also achieve speed to market. Let me recap at this point about the source of innovation. There are 3 quotes that I have here, which is, one is from Bill Joy, who is one of our Berkeley alums, who co-founded Sun Microsystems, and he said, most of the smartest people work for someone else. There's more knowledge outside your company than inside your company, and open innovation is the way by which you can usher that in. Secondly, this is a quote made by Friedrich in 1945. Back then, knowledge is unevenly distributed in society. What that means is the people who had knowledge held on to it and made a lot of money. That was true back then, but it is no longer true because of internet and the plumbing that is there. As the knowledge travels fast, knowledge flows from high to low, and now knowledge is being more evenly distributed in society, and that is presenting new challenges. And unless you create your business models by capturing knowledge flows, you fail. The last one is knowledge is sticky. It means that smart people, when they get together, things happen. Why do great companies are birthed at great universities? Is because smart people get together. And that's another value that we can take away. That's a source of innovation. Source of innovation is each other, smart people. It is also the fact that knowledge has to flow. And also, we need to tap into outside knowledge from around the world, capturing the global brain. So what does open innovation promote? Two things. It promotes efficiency and also sustainability. And efficiency means that economies of scale, which speed to market, you need to get there faster, and also economies of scope. So more ideas coming in so you can add more products without adding cost, and that's what economies of scope is. And lastly, because you take your knowledge and put it into other people's business models, you create an ecosystem where you're protected, where you share the risk, which lowers your risk, also lowers your cost. So 3 takeaways from this particular module. One is not all the smart people work for you. Number 2, external R&D can create significant value, but you need to know how to use it. And number 3, internal R&D is needed to claim a portion of that value for yourself to benefit and sustain your company. Welcome to Module 2. In this module, we're going to establish the need for open innovation. At Garwood Center for Corporate Innovation, where we study and do a lot of research on the various problems that companies are facing and how open innovation is relevant, we have identified some problems, and they all have to do with the resource constraints and competitive forces that exist in the world today. So there's 7 problems that we address. I'll go one by one very quickly. The first one is, as companies mature, innovation doesn't happen as fast as it would when you're a startup. When companies become elephants, they cannot take a U-turn. They cease to be leopards. And what they need is another life. They need innovation inside their companies to give birth to new ideas and establish new markets. That's one problem that we try to address at Berkeley to see what would be the best practices in bringing in more innovative processes in large companies that get stuck. The second problem is, in today's landscape, the product life cycles are shortening very exponentially. That presents a second challenge. How do you deal with that? And we figure that open innovation is the best way, like we have illustrated in the first module, that how you can get that speed so that we can address this problem of short product life cycles and speed to market. The third problem that we are seeing today is the balance sheets are changing. When I was in school back in the 1970s, almost 83% of the assets on the balance sheet were physical assets, like factories, tables, and chairs. But today, the world is far different. It's just the opposite. 80% of the assets are knowledge assets. These are IPs. The problem with IP is that the value evaporates very fast. A molecule that's invented today by a biotech company may be worth millions today, and tomorrow it could be worth 0, because another scientist somewhere in Bangalore has invented a new molecule that's much better. So knowledge assets depreciate fast, unlike physical assets. This is the third challenge. And open innovation, again, plays a very important role. The fourth problem that we are seeing, this was a study done by Deloitte and Touche. It's a 47-year study about all of the publicly traded companies that showed that the return on assets has declining by 75% and with no end at sight, which means that the stewardship of assets, the return on assets, the stewardship of assets that was at one time created a lot of value is not creating that value anymore. Actually, the value that the stockholder is deriving is from this return on equity. Is basically what that means is we are juicing up our balance sheets with more and more debt. Less equity, more debt. It's giving us a higher propensity for risk and creating bubbles that we're noticing in today's economies. That's the other challenge. The fifth problem that we are also noticing is what we call commodity trap. In the old world, we used to make a lot of money based on R&D. This was the closed innovation days. Closed innovation helped us to guard the knowledge, and because other people had no privilege of borrowing it, so we made a lot of money. But the internet and globalization and cross-pollination of employees moving from one place to the other and working for different companies, knowledge is no longer held in fortresses. It is free. Knowledge wants to be free. And so as a result of globalization and speed to market and short product life cycles, that revenue that we once made is no longer as lofty. It's declining. That is what I call A, that I labeled right here. And also the cost of innovation is up, increasing cost of innovation. That's because the product life cycles are short, so which means if you want to come up with a new product, you need to go back and create a new one, and that costs money. So you have A and B. A is due to speed to market and global competition, and B due to increasing cost of innovation. This problem of the commodity trap pervades all companies who are in the product business. A quick story about Motorola's Razor. When the first product came out, they sold 40 million of these things. And Motorola was so happy with the results, it created a much cooler, much sexier product the following year called Razor. But no one bought that product because Nokia became the new number 1 and Motorola became number 10, because the product that Motorola was offering became so irrelevant because Nokia captured the value by selling it to the billion people in China and the billion people in India. So that is called the commodity trap. If you're in the commodity business, this is a real problem that you deal with, and this is for this reason we are exporting a lot of jobs to other countries. Problem 6. As you can see on the slide, we have started in the past where we level 1, and now in today's landscape we're at level 5. In the olden days, we made money by making the product, selling the product, and shipping the product, and very high margins there. But as products became more complex, you go to level 5, you can see that now the business models require no assets. We use other people's assets in order to derive value. This is good and bad. It's good because things are becoming more efficient. All the assets are being utilized, but it also means that those high margins have gone away, and now we're in the low margin world, and we need to figure out how we sustain our businesses, and this is where open innovation is needed. In the next slide, I want to talk about the last problem. It has to do with addressing the needs of the many that live in the world. Companies make products for rich people. We make products for the 1.5 billion rich and not for the 5.5 billion poor. You need innovation to create high value at low cost, because it's easy to create products for the rich people, high value at high cost. And today's business models need to be relevant to the 5.5 billion people who live in emerging economies, because the growth of those economies is 5% versus only 2.5% in the Western economies. So that's a 1.5 trillion opportunity, and open innovation is essential for this process. Now I would like to describe to you three frameworks that cater to this open innovation process. The first one is called the Triple Helix framework. The second one is Open Innovation Framework that we already have learned about. And the third one is the Business Model Framework. The first one, the Triple Helix, it has to do with knowledge generation, deployment, and capture, and how that happens in an economy. Research turns money into knowledge. And knowledge is useless unless it is commercialized and is useful, and that's where you need innovation, and particularly nowadays open innovation. And innovation turns knowledge into money. Because of the two strands of research and innovation, there are two different people, two different mindsets. Researchers are different than the people who innovate based on ideas. You need a third circle here, a third player, and I call that player a benevolent dictator. In this particular case, it is the government. Government makes things happen. It has, we have seen some good models and bad models of this. And the United States in particular has been very, very receptive to creating knowledge as well as creating a business environment in which that flourishes. And this is the way it works, this framework. Government provides the necessary funding to create universities, to create knowledge. During World War I and World War II, United States has looked to universities and invested in universities to create knowledge so that we can be competitive in the world and wipe out the enemy. During World War I and World War II, many of the research that was going on at the universities was classified as top secret. Right here in Silicon Valley, 75% of the PhD thesis in sciences was classified as top secret at Stanford and Berkeley. Because it was that knowledge that helped us to gain the leverage over the enemy, but over the adversary. But when the war ended, the government has to play another role. When the Cold War, at the end of the Cold War, the government had to create policies, tax policies and incentives for investors to come and to take the very ideas that were created for war times into commercial products. And that helped to create businesses that created more commercial products for us that we enjoy today. So the way this triple helix model works is the government plays an important role in creation of knowledge, and the knowledge is then, through various tax policies, is created into commercial products. And these businesses then in turn create jobs, and which means creates more taxpayers, and the government gets its money back. So one thing for us to realize on this triple helix model is that all those circles have to be equal. The reason that this does not work elsewhere in other economies, in Russia and China, where I often speak, and they always ask me the question, how do we create a Silicon Valley? I simply have to say to them that you need to have these three circles in full balance, working together. Let me describe to you that funding is very, very important, and for universities. And once knowledge is created, you need an environment where that knowledge flows out and creates enterprises. And then those enterprises creates jobs and taxpayers, and the government gets paid back and gets its return back. And in countries like Russia, you have a very big circle like this, which is the government. And the government plays such a dominant role that it controls research, the scientists that create the knowledge, and also, to a greater degree, it also controls the business's environment. So the three circles here are not equal. As a result, the economy doesn't really take the exponential growth. The second framework we want to talk about is the business model framework. Open innovation plays a key role in your business model. Every sector, each of the 8 sections or 8 parts of the business model requires open innovation to create that value and to capture that value. A business model has 2 parts. One is creating the value, which you need to capture the global brain to create that value. The second part is to capturing some of that value for your company so your company is sustained over time. And both are important, and both require open innovation. The third framework is the open innovation framework, which we have described at length in the first section. And it has to do with capturing that global brain. Now, I would like to ask you a question. Which is more important? Is it technology or is it a business model? I would differ with you if you're saying better technology is the key. Technology is useless unless it's commercialized and put to use, and it requires open innovation. Let me end with this story. In 1974, a coffee machine was introduced. It never made money for 20 years. Today, the same technology exists. It's offered in the market. No change to the technology. And after 20 years, this company, Nespresso, made more money, and more so than all its competitors, even during the Great Recession. Why? Because they realized that it is not the technology, it is the business model that was wrong with it. So they changed the business model. They're not selling the coffee pod anymore. They're selling the pods. Customers valued the flavors of coffee, the different flavors of coffee, and the high quality of coffee more so than the machine. So the machine, you give it away, but you make money on the pods. And so this company's margins went up because of open innovation. So business model brings a lot more value than technology. Sometimes people have made money even on terrible technology because they had a great business model. You can sell anything if you have the right business model, because a business model will let you scale the technology and will also help you to profit from the technology that you have, and also improve the technology further because it generates cash flow. And also it helps you to acquire new technologies to complement the technology that you already have. This brings us to the end of this module. Welcome to Module 3, Open Innovation at Work. When you see this picture, what do you imagine? You see a picture that looks like fortresses, where citadels, where knowledge was hidden. And these are the different R&D labs, AT&T, IBM, Procter & Gamble, and Philips. This is where no new knowledge has gone in and nothing has come out. It's the knowledge that was created in these fortresses was safeguarded. Because the world has changed and we live in a different landscape, in 2003, Philips broke down those walls. Philips had 50,000 patents. It safeguarded those patents through barbed wire. They had 700 engineers working. And finally, it realized that it needs to open up and brought those silos down and tore down those barbed wire fences. Now the picture is something different, and it looks like this. Now Philips has over 75 companies housed inside its location. Over 7,000 people at high-tech campuses working within those walls. It brought in knowledge in, and knowledge is also flowing out. It began to leverage joint R&D across industries, extended research and capabilities for new ideas and technologies. And now it houses a lot of corporate innovators, research institutes, consultancy services, and economic development companies. This is the P&G story. Procter & Gamble also believed in closed innovation and operated under closed innovation for a long time until it had a heart attack in year 2000 where the stock dropped 31%. They used to call the headquarters the Kremlin of Ohio because nothing came in and nothing went out of those four walls. They hired a new CEO who came in and said, we just need to open up, because he realized more money is being generated from companies that they acquired or products they have acquired, that knowledge came in, than the R&D that they produced and the products that they came up with. So he began to realize that they need to open up and bring in more knowledge inside. And so they said, we will acquire 50% of our innovations from outside of P&G because of the sheer realization of the fact there's more knowledge outside the company than inside the company. So this slide kind of shows you that how do you tap into the global brain. And P&G now collaborates with 2 million scientists and engineers outside of the company through different processes that it has devised, which change the direction of this company. So instead of saying that, not invented here syndrome, they began to say we proudly found this innovation outside of our four walls. So P&G is a great success story. It's a classic case of the open funnel, where now they collaborate with so many different entities to bring knowledge inside and also to let the knowledge flow outside for collaborative activities. That brought its R&D costs down, and the amount of money that they spend on R&D has far more impact in generating new products that are very impactful. So you can see how P&G has picked up again in its stock price after this new implementation of open innovation policies. The story of IBM. IBM is another company that practiced closed innovation for a long time. It used to be in the business of selling computers and servers, and until it realized that it needed to open up its business model, being in the product business for a long time, where the products have been commoditized, it needed to look beyond its products and look into other services. They hired a new CEO who came and he changed the business model from a product to a service business. Now, the IBM company now sees itself as a business partner, as a knowledge broker, share its knowledge to empower other business models and create value for itself. So once the business model has changed, you can see that IBM has picked up and has bounced back. And 90 billion of the revenue in 2005 came from businesses that did not exist 15 years ago. That is a story of transformation due to open innovation. Now, as we mentioned before, open innovation means knowledge has to flow out, knowledge also has to flow in. How does IBM facilitate the outflow of knowledge? It facilitates the outflow of knowledge by helping others be instrumented, interconnected, and intelligent through the IP that it has in its inventory. And so it got into other businesses like smart cities, IBM Watson, and in enabling other companies and other entities to go forward and creating value for itself. So this is the outflow, inside out. Now, knowledge also has to flow in. And how does IBM able to capture knowledge from the outside? IBM does this by collaborating with about 5,000 universities worldwide. It appointed a director for global universities and programs where they scout for ideas from universities. They believe that the future is already here and it's at the universities. And so through this kind of collaboration, IBM is able to bring in outside knowledge in and also take its own knowledge and put it out. There's the Intel story. The Intel inside is really the Intel outside, because most of the IP that Intel secures to put onto its chip is IP that's acquired from the outside. So here's a story where the outside knowledge is what makes Intel more valuable rather than its own internal knowledge in its labs. The story of Nike's open innovation. Nike is a company that in 2010, it put out a lot of the IP that it created itself, about 400 patents of eco-friendly materials to create its shoes and other products. It put it out for people to partake. And the idea here is that Nike did not have the knowledge within its four walls to take those patents and improve them and create more value. So it wanted to capture the global brain, so it put it out so people can take it and give them a license, actually, to acquire those patents at no cost, so they could be developed further. And at some point, Nike could take them back and buy them back and incorporate it into their own business models. It is a way of creating more knowledge and more IP and value for itself without adding payroll. So that is a real innovative way of where outside knowledge is captured in and by putting inside knowledge out. VMware is another great company, and they believe that culture is very, very important for this company to put open innovation at work, to solicit ideas, and to generate and stimulate more ideas. And they believe in the 5 E's, 5 elements. They believe in open innovation to really take root and blossom in a corporation. They need to be these 5 E's. The first E is exchange. You need to have people within a company exchanging knowledge. And if that environment for sharing knowledge is not there, open innovation does not take place. The second one is experimentation. You need to let people experiment and fail. Give them permission to fail. So you learn from failures. The third E is enablement. You provide training and tools. You equip people so they're empowered to generate more ideas as they learn. The fourth one is empowerment. Empowerment, meaning granting authority, not just giving titles, but give them real authority. They can make the right decisions rather than to clip their wings. And that environment has to exist for open innovation, not only to take place, but also to move it forward. The last one is encouragement. You need to celebrate success, celebrate innovation through holding award ceremonies. Kaiser Permanente does this every Friday. They take the ideas that were solicited from the staff, whether they be nurses, whether they be janitors or security guards, all those ideas, the best ideas were celebrated every Friday, so you need encouragement. These 5 E's are essential for open innovation culture to take place. Let me do a quick rundown on the profile of an open innovation company, what it looks like. An open innovation company looks for external ideas and technologies to bring them in. That's outside in. Second, it also looks for opportunities to place the internal IP into other people's business models. Number 3, it also is involved in opening up the business models to the entire ecosystem. So creation of an ecosystem is very, very important. So you reduce the risk and you also increase the efficiencies. Number 4, an open innovation company is a company that keeps open books with partners to share the struggles, the pains. So maybe those pains could be relieved and ideas could be exchanged by the people that you collaborate with. Number 5, opportunities to create a new ecosystem. An open innovation company is always looking outside its 4 walls to create opportunities and new ecosystems to collaborate and partner so that it could benefit from the entire ecosystem and secure itself from additional risks. So finally, positioning in the global landscape, given the open innovation process, number 1, you need to think globally in creating value. People in India, in little villages, are putting their products on the internet. That is thinking globally. Define the right business model to capture the value. You need to create a business model and not the technology. Technology is great, but the business model is what is going to capture the value. You need to define the right business model. Number 3, network with a larger ecosystem to distribute that value. You need to have partners. You can't live in silos. You need to engage with customers and maintain relationships and communities to enhance that value so your value stays fresh. Number 5, invest in cost-effective resources to profit from that value. Number 6, collaborate for a win-win to share the value. Number 7, devise ways to protect that value, the core value that you create within your 4 walls, and safeguard it. And 8, sacrifice the short term for the long term. So business models that only take care of the short term never last. In order to create a long-term strategy, you need to have open innovation, sharing the value, creating ecosystems, creating communities, or joining communities to sustain that value. That brings us to our last module.
You have now come to the last part of the course. The only thing that remains, that's the exam. I really hope that you have enjoyed this course and hope to see you in one of the other courses within this 4-course specialization. This EIT digital specialization comprises the following 4 courses: the impact of technology, innovation and entrepreneurship from basics to open innovation, innovation and entrepreneurship from design thinking to funding, and marketing strategy for entrepreneurs. Together, these 4 courses will give you a broad overview and a number of methods and tools to be able to capture the value of technology. I hope to see you in the next course.